Well, welcome along. I'm Charlie Webster. I'm a broadcaster and I'm also an ambassador for Women's Aid. And I'm really pleased to welcome Ian Bartholomew. Ian, give us a wave today.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning, with the news that from the 25th of November, Ian, this is great news, on the day for the elimination of violence against women and girls, which is also the start of 16 days of activism. Ian's single, you're single, Ian. This time it's forever dedicated to survivors of domestic abuse will be available for downloading and streaming.
Yeah, hurrah!
Clap. This is due to popular demand as it was released last month, which is when we last spoke. The single celebrates freedom from abuse and has received so much acclaim, Ian, from domestic abuse survivors who's called it strong and powerful. And before we carry on, one of the daughters of one of the survivors who featured in the video, for those that don't know, Ian's video features various different survivors, including Saadi Khan, who's with us now. She's a survivor of domestic abuse and also an ambassador for Women's Aid. And it also includes my face, which I think my face is the first one. But the daughter of one of the survivors who featured in the video said, "I think the video touched many up and down the country, including myself. The video and the people involved gave out a clear message of this is real. This does happen, and this happens to someone every day," which I think is important for us to remember. It's distributed by Absolute. This time it's forever is now set to raise further funds. Thanks to you, Ian, you're pledging to donate a significant percentage of profits to Women's Aid every time it's streamed or downloaded. So download and stream. And the song has already raised over £3,000 for its dedicated Just Giving page. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone out there, survivors, victims, and all members of the public. So let's get straight into it, Ian, because last time we spoke was actually the release of the single. And you know, I'd seen it and we saw it for the first time on here, but nobody's seen it. How does it feel now, you know, speaking when it's actually survivors that really wanted this to be available to download?
It's incredibly gratifying that people have got behind it, and we've actually managed to make it do what we wanted it to do. We wanted it to say something strong and powerful and meaningful, and you know, the way it was shot, the way it was all put together by both the producer of the single and the film company Three Wise Monkeys, who are both here today. I have to say hi, guys. You know, they did such a fantastic job, and people have been so supportive and helpful right the way down the line. They've given their time free. They've given us great deal of support, and it's amazing that people are reacting to it in the way that they are. I'm very pleased and I'm quite humbled, actually. It has to be said.
And what was it like when you first? I think I asked you this before, but now that it's, you know, now that you've kind of put it out there, what was it like when you watched the survivors video? So to give a bit of context, I mean, myself and Saadi and lots of other different survivors were asked to sit and have a think for a minute about what it was like.
Apart from it being an incredibly brave thing to do for people to actually put themselves out there and know that their face was going to be used in something like this, and we didn't know how it was going to go. We didn't know how successful or not it was going to be. But just the mere fact that people were able or felt themselves able to do it was remarkable. And they came in. We got them. You know, they didn't all come at once. So we were watching over the period of a week or two, and you know, they were terribly moving. Some of them really, really very upsetting, and others that had sort of hope and fortitude and strength in them as well. So there's a lot more footage than you actually see in the promo video. And a lot of a great deal of it is positive, but there's also that pain and that hurt and the confusion that victims and, you know, later survivors must feel when they're in the middle of this terrible situation that they find themselves in.
Saadi, what was it like for you doing it? Because I mean, you know, I consider you a friend, and I think that it's hard to go there sometimes. I mean, when I did it, I kind of sat there, and for me, I do feel like I detach a lot from the emotion, because I think once you start to relive that, even though it's in the past, the emotion and the hurt is still very much prominent.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really difficult to sort of want to go there, and obviously because it's for Women's Aid, I'm always available. And when it was asked of me to just sit there and do this recording, I was a bit apprehensive, and I thought, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll just record myself. And I could feel myself resisting. I didn't want to go there. And then all of a sudden, I just saw this video being played in my head of this young girl um, being tied up, beaten with a bat, thrown against the wall for making a cup of tea, you know. And then and it still does, even when I think about it, because I see her as a young girl, not me. I see her as a young girl, and I feel so like I can't help her, I can't do anything. And just watching the video being played of the violence and the fear and all of it going in, it sort of ended up spiraling out of control for me, because it was so violent. And all of a sudden I heard these sort of voices in my head of the guys that supported me to get me out, especially one of the doctors that I met, who was like, don't let this define you. He would say things like, this isn't who you are, don't let this define you, get up. And when those voices started coming into my head, I started to get a little bit more control again. And sort of, I could feel myself sort of trying to stand up, trying to be like, I've survived this. But it wasn't until after the video did I realize that was me, if that makes sense. So there is a detachment, because you sort of have gone so past in your mind, you're controlling it. It's like a mind game every time. And you sort of, when you're asked to look, you want to look at a distance rather than be in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you sort of want to, you've got like a little bit of a doorway you're peeping in your head to see that person, it happened. And that's really how difficult it was for me, to be fair.
And, I know quite a bit of what happened to you, and you were a girl, and that's so important to remember that. And you
Yeah.
are helping yourself now, and you are the healthy adult that's taking care of that girl inside. Sorry, I want to ask you one more question before going back to Ian. What was
Yeah.
it like then when you saw the video and
Oh,
any
wow.
song?
Yeah, I mean, the whole video, the music, the words that Ian sung, they were so like real. And then the video that got played with the actors, I could feel every step. It was, oh my God, that happens. Oh my God, that's what I was doing. This is how I felt. The apprehension when they'd open the door, you didn't know if he was there. You know, the fear of opening a door and someone spiking out at you, running in the outside with no shoes on, trying to be quiet, all of it. It was so real. And then watching the faces that popped up, I just felt, oh my God, look at all these women that have come out of it. I'm not the only one, which I know I'm not the only one, but you're in your little world. And then you see these women smiling and happy, and it gives you hope. And then you think, well, if this is so powerful, this has to change people's ideas, perceptions, fears around domestic abuse. And it was so hopeful, if I can say that. It was so full of hope and amazing women. I just was so proud to be part of it, to think, wow, check us women out, look what we've survived, sort of thing. It felt a bit, I got the confidence after watching the whole thing. Oh my God, there's so much hope, they can survive this, they've survived it, they have survived it, they're there, they're laughing and smiling. So yeah, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. Well done, Ian.
Oh, thank you for sharing with us as well. I know it's not easy, in the middle of the day to kind of go back there. Ian, how does it make you feel listening to Zadi there, but also say how hopeful it was in what you wanted and hoped to achieve?
Yeah, I think that's the overriding thought that I have about the whole thing, and it was always part of the work that we were doing on the storyline in Coronation Street as well. We were trying to make it as real and as vital as we possibly could, because we knew that this wasn't just a storyline on TV. It's happening for real to people in a house near you now. Do you know what I mean? It's so, and it's become so prevalent since lockdown, which is really what encouraged me and sort of inspired me to write the song. Was that after having spent so long playing a nasty, horrible, mean, cruel, unpleasant man, I couldn't help but be affected by it as an actor, because I was Ian watching Jeff being horrible to Yasmine, who was Shelley. So Ian was watching Shelley being destroyed in front of him, and Ian was watching. It was all very confusing. And towards the end of the filming, when we'd done all the really violent stuff, lockdown happened, and suddenly everything stopped, and so I had time to reflect. And I was listening to the news every day, and those cases of domestic abuse just spiraling out of control, and women dying, and children, families being completely torn apart, made me so angry. And the song was an emotional response to that, to having all the information that I got from the research that I'd done to play Jeff through Women's Aid, and through Teresa and everybody there who helped and who were very involved in the storyline. That all sort of all coalesced into this little ball of anger and need to do something and need to get it out of my system. And that's where the song came from. It sort of wrote itself, really. So to hear that I managed to encapsulate what I wanted to, which was about the confusion and the hurt and the pain and the misunderstanding and the violence of a domestic abusive relationship. It's very gratifying, and I'm pleased that it's worked. I'm very happy that it's worked, because it needs to be said. Domestic abuse happens behind closed doors in the shadows, and we really need to drag it out through the front door and into the street and into the light, so everyone can see, so that we can tackle it in the future and do something about it as a society, not just as individuals.
Yeah, it sounds strange, but we almost need to normalize the conversation so that it's not something that's so hidden.
No, that's right.
Ian, just even listening to you there, I can see how it must have affected you. You can kind of feel it listening to you.
Yeah.
What were the challenges, and how on earth did you get into that to play Jeff so well? I mean, you've already won, various different awards for the playing his character. Can you tell us more about that, Ian? Because I can't imagine what it must be like.
I always knew it was going to turn dark. Jeff was going to turn dark, because he started off as a bit of a
So on that note, did you always know then that you were going to play an abuser? How in advance did you get that script?
It was intimated that was going to happen. They weren't sure, and I don't think they knew quite how dark or in what direction it was going to go. But after about 6 months, I was called into the producer's office and said, "Look, we're taking up your next option, and we want Jeff to go into this coercive control storyline. We want to use an older couple to show that it can happen to anybody at any time in their lives, and also that Jeff is a serial abuser, because this is so often the case statistically." So I have to say, it did take me quite a while to get my head around it, simply because he is so alien to me in so many ways, that I found it very, very difficult to take the first steps in the scenes that we were getting to do. And we're always shooting about 6 or 7 weeks in advance, so you get the scripts within about 2 weeks of shooting. The storyliners and the editors and the producers know what's happening, and they give you an overview every so often, but you don't really know what you're going to be doing until you get the scripts about 2 weeks before you shoot it. So I had to do quite a lot of work in my own space, and through the research, as I said, with Women's Aid and talking to people and victims and survivors. And I had the way I put it together was by taking all the common denominators that I heard from those victims and survivors, the common denominators of the behavior of the people that were their abusers and the perpetrators. So I couldn't talk to a perpetrator. We couldn't find one that would own up to it, and let alone talk about it. So I had to sort of put this jigsaw puzzle back together for myself. And a couple of the directors early on were brilliant, because one of them said, a director called Duncan Foster just said, "This is all about love. He loves this woman, and it all turns sour. Of course it does. Further down the line, it's going to turn sour, but it has to come out of this feeling that he loves her, and that he's vulnerable and he needs her so badly that he's prepared to go to any lengths to keep her." And that was sort of a key. It sort of clicked in. And to go to those places in my own character, my own psychological makeup, I have to say it was not easy. And it was quite distressing at times, because as I said earlier on, when you're watching somebody crumble in front of you, it's not easy, even if you know that it's acting, and it all was acting. But the stuff that I found really difficult was when it became cruel towards the middle of the storyline, how it was all developing. The cruelty was the thing that really shocked me, actually. And they wrote it brilliant. I think the writing and the storylines did a fantastic job, and we played it to the hilt because we had to, because it's about real people's lives. It's not just, as I said earlier on, it's not a TV story. It's a real story, and we needed to do it properly.
Can I? Sorry,
no, sorry, go.
Say, Ian, I think you're absolutely right, because that whole line of coming from love, I totally experienced with mine. Mine was, you know, one minute he'd be absolutely violent, hitting me for something little, or you know, refusing to me, allowing me to go out, but the next minute he was helping with my maths, because I was at university at the time, and then it would be like, you know, I care about you, you're helping me because my mother died when I was young. And then you have this sort of guilt and this emotion of a mixed sort of backwards and forwards sort of roller coaster. So I think they played that absolutely right with the storyline, where some of them actually think it is love that they're showing, and that sort of type of control. So yeah, I totally get that completely.
And I think that's what I was just going to say, breaks the stigma, I think, that people maybe don't understand in the taboo, because the thing that we have to remember when it comes to domestic abuse is that it is through love, and that's what is so confusing. It's not like you're walking down the street and then somebody's doing these things to you. That's a stranger. It's somebody that you have that connection with, and it's extremely confusing. Ian, I know you were about to say something, but I also wanted to ask you, just off what you were saying, more about how it emotionally affected you, because as an actor you have to really go there. And I know your partner is on this recording somewhere behind the scenes. How do you know, did your family notice? How difficult was it you going home?
I don't think it was easy being around me at times. I did approach Coronation Street and ITV for some counselling, which they gave me very kindly. So I had the opportunity every week of being able to walk into a room with a lovely man called Bill, who was incredibly helpful, and just offload and say, look, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I hate about this man. This is what I hate about this storyline, but I know I have to do it. He was fantastically helpful and very calm and very clear about stuff. But it did make me question my own behavior in the past. It made me question my behavior. It's still making me question some things that I do and some things that I say. So that's a good thing. You know, we always need to be aware that we are capable of that sort of control and that sort of behavior. And I'm trying to make sure that I don't go there. But it's been emotionally really quite tricky. People say to me, "You're playing a villain. It's got to be fun." Nah, because I really don't like Jeff. I'm putting my hand up now. I'm saying I really, really don't like the character that I play. But I realised at the same time that it was an important story to tell, and I needed to do it as well as I could to make it real.
Ian, you know, what you just said, I think, is one of the most important things I've heard in conversations around domestic abuse, is that we're all capable of this behavior. Because I think sometimes there's a perception that, oh my God, these are monstrous people that are born like monsters, and it's not true. That's why it's so prevalent, because it's not one-off people, and we are all capable of this behavior. And I think it's so courageous for everyone to say, oh, actually, you know, I need to assess myself. You know, I think that's incredibly powerful. And we just had a one question, a press question. I just want to ask you off the back of what you said. And why did you decide to see a counsellor? I suppose it's a really healthy emotional decision to do that, to know that it's something that it's not separated from you, as in how it affects you.
Well, because it helped me share it with somebody else. When I could actually say to somebody else, look, this is how I feel, this is what I'm doing. I didn't have to take it out on everybody else. I could go into that room, and that was my sort of safe place, actually. Not that I wasn't safe at home, not that I was unsafe around my wife and children, but I didn't feel that I could burden them with something that I was going through and having to deal with, because it wasn't really their problem. You know, I was doing my work, and you know, I've done other things. I've played other unpleasant people. A few years ago, I did a stage show where I was doing a play by Bertolt Brecht called The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, who is a mixture of Hitler and Al Capone. So, you know, I'm used to playing unpleasant people, but I think it was because it was over such a long period of time. We've been working on this storyline, and this I've been working on this character for over 2 years, and that is what is so different about it, because Coronation Street is ongoing. It's not a 6-week job where you take on a character and then you sort of, you know, you brush it off and you go on to the next. You're living with it all the time. So you are in many ways taking it home with you quite a lot. So I needed that space and that place to be able to offload it onto somebody else. And I could see them going, okay, I'm ready, talk to me. And that was incredibly helpful.
Ian, I'm conscious of time, and I've got a few questions that the press want me to ask as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
Come in, but I
Yeah.
just want, you know, going back to the song, I'd love to hear from you what your hopes are for this. Now it's going to be available for download and streaming.
I mean, I think in the short term, it's to raise funds. In the long term, it's to raise awareness and for all of us to understand what domestic abuse does and how it affects people, how it affects families, what it does to children, what it does to the perpetrators, and where those perpetrators have learnt that behaviour from, where they've got that from. And you know, I don't want to get too pompous about it, but I think we need to start a really, really, really important conversation as a society, and not just leave it for governments. I mean, the government need to get involved, but as individuals, we all need to take responsibility in some way. And as a society, we need to take responsibility for something that is an appalling and insidious crime.
Yeah, and it's not just done by government funds; it's all done by us,
Yeah.
us looking at our own communities.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions that have come in.
Yeah.
How did you find filming the Yasmine Jeff trial episodes? I suppose we touched on it, but they were so impactful, and the story from us, now the public, seems to be reaching quite a dramatic conclusion.
Yeah, it is. Well, I can't give too much away, but they were really really intense, I have to say, because both Yasmine and Jeff are telling their stories, and when it comes down to it, it's about who the jury in the court believes and who the judge believes to be, or in fact the jury believed to be, telling the truth. And so you have all the testimony from the other so-called witnesses, but when it comes down to it, it was Jeff and Yasmine telling their story in public. And of course Jeff loved it, because he was having his day in court, and that's what it was all about for him. And he goes in with this confidence to convince people that actually he was right all along, and it's all her fault, and he's been the victim. So it was pretty intense.
Yeah, and you know, just I know so many people that have gone through that process, and it's not been a great outcome. I think it's really powerful that the team have decided to use a trial as well to play
Yeah.
out these storylines. I think it's not something that we often see. We touched upon it, and we touched upon it from you know, myself and Sadi, and you know, at the very beginning of this session, I did speak about a daughter of one of the survivors in your you know, song, in your video. But what's the reaction overall been to the song from fans so far? Because last time we did speak, it was on the release, and last time we
Yeah.
heard from you. But have you, you know, what's it been like for you, as many people approached you as well?
Well, since the release of the video on YouTube, we sort of pretty much went into tier 3 lockdown, and now we're in complete lockdown. So actually, I haven't been meeting that many people at all in the public, and of course on the website we're not inviting comments. But I have heard through Women's Aid that a lot of survivors and victims have been getting in touch and saying, you know, and being very positive and very supportive. So as far as I'm aware, it's going down well, and it's doing the job that we wanted it to do. But the people in the street talk much more about Coronation Street because they see that more often than they've seen the video. You know, I mean, we've done, I think we've done incredibly well on the amount of views we've had on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
With the video, but of course we're getting to millions of people on Coronation Street every week. So the focus has been more about the Jeff and Yasmine storyline, and again, it's been very supportive. I haven't been handbagged. Nobody's come up to me and tried to
I was going to say, do
give me a
people
slack.
sometimes forget that you're acting?
Yeah, I mean, there was a point, I think, and the press office handled this really well in Coronation Street, where people suddenly started to get the fact that it was acting and I was an actor playing a part rather than really being Jeff. And that sort of happened around about the time of the beginning of lockdown, I think, or just before that, the first lockdown in earlier in the year in March. So there was an understanding that this was actually not real, but the fact that people were so involved and were so angry at Jeff and hated him so much meant that we were getting through, you know.
Yeah, and you've done a fabulous job for people
to
think that. And I think it's very brave and courageous to take on a perpetrator role, because I can imagine that's extremely difficult. I'm conscious we're running out of time. I could talk to you both a lot longer. Before you go, Sadie, just final question for you, and then I know, Ian, you want to say a few words and thank yous.
Yeah, I do.
What would you say as one bit of advice, Sadie, to anybody that maybe can relate to something that might be looking like an unhealthy relationship or coercive control, and maybe also to people that are looking from the outside in?
Well, definitely to get onto Women's Aid, obviously the website, there's lots of information out there as well. When I realized things were going totally wrong, I confided in a friend, because I was so worried about certain things. So to speak to somebody in confidence, if you feel like you just escape, because there's a lot of fear around it, that something, if you say something, he's going to find out, you're going to, get caught or whatever. And I think the first thing I would do would definitely to get hold of one of the websites, get on there, speak to a counsellor, speak to somebody anonymously, speak to your friend, somebody that you really confide in, because it's really important to have that support. I never had any support at the start until one of my friends found me unconscious in my room. So it was until then that I actually sort of opened up. The second thing that I did, and it took me a while, and it's a really hard thing to do, to try and get out of it, of this whole thing, is I sat down and re-looked at my belief system. How the hell did I have this in my head that it was okay for a guy or anybody to hit me? And it took me, I spent like literally 2 weeks alone, where I didn't go out, and I just sat and reevaluated my entire belief system and my values of what my line was, what was acceptable as a human being, what wasn't. And I think that I sort of made a commitment to myself to say, this is not acceptable, it's not right, and I'm not going to allow somebody to speak to me rudely or speak to me loudly or actually touch me or hit me in those ways. And I think that really sort of helped me. But I also had to be honest with myself, and I know this is going to be really hard for a lot of people when I say this, but I had to accept my part in all of it. And my part in all of that was I chose to stay. And that was because of my belief system, and that was because of the values that I had sort of got as I went through life as a 19-year-old to whenever. And that was the hardest thing I've ever done, where I had to accept my part in all of it, to stay for that time. And that was the bit that I found so difficult, but it changed how I sort of went forward in life, to get out of it and to be hopeful and to be where I am. And to be fair, if it wasn't for Women's Aid, I'll be honest now, to be fair, if it wasn't for Women's Aid, if it wasn't for Teresa, yourself, Charlie, all the ambassadors that worked together, I would have never stood up and spoken out ever. It was a secret for me. So yeah, I think the best thing is to pick the phone up, read articles, get to where you need to be with the support system around you. And I think that's the best thing anyone can do, really.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Your voice is so incredibly powerful. And I want you to know it will reach so many people. And like, I really admire you as a friend, as an ambassador. And I think you're extremely right, because boundaries get really skewed of how we value ourselves, I think, which is really important to know that nobody deserves that. So thank you. And Ian, I know you've got some thank yous to wrap us up today. And I want to thank you to you, Ian, actually, before you say thank you to everyone else, you know, because you're doing this as well. It's not just about raising funds, but it's about the awareness and getting the conversation out there.
Yeah. But I mean, just some of what Sally was saying there, and towards the end, that's exactly why I wrote the song. That's where the song came from, of that need to be able to recognize that you're in there and then find a way out. That's why I wrote the song. So thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me. I have a few thank yous, and they're in no particular order, so this won't take long, I promise. I'd like to thank Phil and Susie Godsall for all the locations where we shot the video. Sasha and Trish and Max and all the film crew at Three Wise Monkeys, who did a fantastic job. Let's be honest, it looks brilliant. They were a joy to work with, and they've been a help and support all the way through, and are continuing to be so. They've been fantastic. I'd like to thank all our sponsors who sponsored us with some cash to make the video, especially Steve and Anne, Cindy and Paddy, Jane and Ed, and the Steve Morgan Foundation, which is based not far away from where we live in Cheshire. I got in touch with them through a friend, said, you know, they might help, and they came on board almost immediately, within 2 hours of getting an email, with a substantial amount of money to help us make the video. So many, many, many thanks to Steve Morgan Foundation. Thank you. I'd like to thank Teresa and Katie and all the team at Women's Aid, who have been invaluable in their advice and help and support, and information and research that we've done on the storyline, and for just generally being involved in all of this as well. They've been fantastic. I'd like to thank Saskia and everybody at CWA, which is Cheshire Without Abuse, who supply some of the videos or approach some of the survivors for some of the videos that we used in the video. I'd like to thank the cast, Sarah Jane Potts, Joe Milson, who was lurking in the background there, being unpleasant, and my son, James, who played the boy. I'd like to really thank all the survivors in the video, because, as I said earlier on, it's such a remarkably brave thing to have done. And I salute you, and I respect and admire you for doing what you've done. Thank you. The musicians on the song, Jack McManus, who played the piano. It's not me playing the piano, although I can play the piano, but not as well as that. Ben Collier, who did the string arrangements. Kevin Tuffy, who mastered it, but mostly to James F. Reynolds, the producer, who we found through an acquaintance of my wife, Loveday. And we sent the song to and saying, is this any good? And he went, yeah, I love the song. I love the vocal. I don't want to use any of the rest of it, because it sounded like a 60-year-old bloke in his shed on his garage band, bashing drums and all sorts of other stuff. And has done such a brilliant job on the production, giving his time absolutely free. He spent hours on that song, hours, and I think has done a fantastic job. Quickly as well, Corrie and Coronation Street and ITV for being supportive and doing all the work that they've done on the publicity, especially Alison Sinclair in the press office, who has been legendary in her support and help, and the time that she spent working with both the publicity for Coronation Street, but also all the song stuff, all the release, all around the release date. And lastly, I'd like to thank my wife, who has been constantly pushing me. And it was her idea to make the video. It was her idea to send the song to James. It was her idea that I should disappear down the shed and actually write it and do it. And she directed the video. And I'm going to get quite emotional now, but if it hadn't been for her, we wouldn't be talking about this now. So I'd like to thank her publicly and personally and very humbly. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That's lovely to hear. Loveday, you are there, sneaking around in the background. You can turn your camera on if you like. Hey, there she is. I thought that was important to see your face. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you to you all for joining us as well. We really appreciate your time. I know everyone's busy at the moment. Oh, fabulous. We've just got a message in from Patricia. Hi, Patricia. Hi. Do you want to unmute yourself and say, rather than me delivering it?
Yeah, sure. So Sasha and I have a podcast called Raw Sound Action that we started during lockdown last lockdown, and we actually recorded a special episode with Ian surrounding this subject and the release of the song last week, and so that will be coming out the same day or the same week that the song comes out in conjunction with. So it's all about the song, how it came about, involvement with Women's Aid, and the whole subject matter.
Well, thank you, Patricia. Well, thanks so much for everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we've ran a little bit over. And remember that it'll be available for download and streamed on the 25th of November, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Sadie, for joining us. And thanks, everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your Monday.
Bye.
Bye.